Hello. Did you know that only 2 people have won both a Nobel Prize and an Oscar? One is the famous Bob Dylan, fantastic Bob Dylan, and the other lived in a place called Ayot St Lawrence in Hertfordshire, and you can visit their home. They got a Nobel Prize in 1925 and an Oscar in 1939. Do you know who it was? It was George Bernard Shaw, and he lived part of his time, he lived in London and had a country house at St Lawrence in Hertfordshire, and it's called Shaw's Corner. And I highly recommend a visit to this National Trust property. So this is what today's video is about. I really hope you enjoy it, and I hope you really find it interesting. Shaw's Corner is situated very near to the village of Wheathampstead and the town of Welwyn Garden City in Hertfordshire. It's beautiful countryside, Hertfordshire countryside, kind of narrow winding lanes to get there. I highly recommend going online and booking a visit to the house. They do very informative and interesting guided tours of the home, or alternatively you can visit just the gardens if you wish. They also do quite a lot of events there. They sometimes put on plays in the garden. The National Trust also have a very nice Facebook site, and so do go online and check all these things out. And so, who was George Bernard Shaw? He is a man who's famous for saying many things. There are many wonderful quotes attributed to George Bernard Shaw. One of my favourites is, "A life spent making mistakes is not only more honourable but more useful than a life spent doing nothing." Shaw was born in Dublin in 1856. He came from a lower middle class family, and one of his first jobs was collecting rents from poor tenant holders. Many of them were slum dwellings, and this had a very huge impact upon him in later life, because he actually saw at first hand what poor people were going through. So like I said, he was born in 1856. He came over to London in his early 20s, and he subsequently married Charlotte, who's also Anglo-Irish, and they both lived in London, and Charlotte was exceptionally supportive of Bernard Shaw, and as I explain later, helped him immensely. And they came across Ayot St Lawrence in 1906. They lived in nice accommodation in London and made many friends, as you'll see from the house. And they came across Ayot St Lawrence in 1906. It was intended to be a rectory, but was a bit too big for the purpose, and they rented it initially, but subsequently bought it. So it's an Edwardian house, north facing. The garden is south facing, which is very nice indeed. And what they really loved about Ayot St Lawrence's property, which they later named Shaw's Corner, was it was very, very quiet. Sadly, Charlotte died in 1943, and George Bernard Shaw later died at Shaw's Corner in 1950, aged 94. So, like I said, Shaw was awarded a Nobel Prize for Literature and subsequently a film Oscar in 1939 for writing a film adaptation of his play Pygmalion. Then a number of years later, in the 1960s, the film My Fair Lady was made from Pygmalion, and he also wrote 60 plays. Shaw became the leading dramatist of his generation. He came from very humble origins in Dublin, and he was largely self-educated. He became a leading social commentator of his day. He was a socialist and a leading member of the Fabian Society. He cared passionately about the poor and the disadvantaged in society. And he was also a vegetarian. He loved animals. Bernard Shaw and his wife Charlotte did not have children, and they decided quite early on, as he was quite famous, they decided that they would give their home, Shaw's Corner, to the National Trust before they passed away. So it makes it a very, very special place in that all his personal belongings are still there, and it feels like that Bernard Shaw's still living there. You see his pens on his desk, his famous postcards that he used to write to people, and it's amazing. You go to the house and it's like he's still living there, and you almost half expect him to come round the corner. Before becoming a famous playwright, Shaw wrote articles for newspapers. He was a theatre critic. He wrote a number of novels. There's no doubt that he worked really hard, actually, and he loved to work hard. Even late in life, well into his 90s, he used to deal with masses of letters every day. He had a huge amount of mail come to his house here at Ayot St Lawrence. A way of coping with this was he would answer people often with postcards. Some of these had pre-printed bits, standard responses to some, and then he would make it personal, add bits to it as well. But he really worked hard. And so on this video, we're just going to do a quick whistle-stop tour of the house. I just want to highlight things to look out for when you come and visit. We want you to come and look at Ayot St Lawrence. So in the reception area, it's amazing. You've got all these hats on his hat stand. Really, really, like I said, he's still there. And throughout the house, you'll see freshly cleaned and polished pairs of his shoes. He didn't have particularly large feet as well, I noted. There's a piano. George Bernard Shaw was a self-taught musician. George and Charlotte loved to travel. You'll see on the walls that they used to like buying paintings and pictures and souvenirs from places they visited around the world. In one room you'll see the Oscar that he won on a mantelpiece, and then in another room you'll see the Nobel Prize that he won. Most beautiful document, actually. And for me, the absolute highlight in the house is a statue that was commissioned in 1906 by Rodin of George Bernard Shaw. It's an amazing statue, incredible really, and well worth seeing. On one wall you'll see a lovely painting of George's wife Charlotte. In a recent book by Ann Oakley called The Forgotten Wives, How Women Get Written Out of History, Oakley, who's a professor of sociology and social policy at University College London, has found evidence suggesting that Charlotte Shaw has tended to be written out of history and that her role has been very underplayed. Oakley explains Charlotte came from a wealthy Anglo-Irish family and used the money she inherited to enable Shaw to write full-time following their marriage in 1898. She supported him financially so he could make a reputation with his plays. Oakley in her book also explains how Charlotte also helped him stage many of his plays for the first time and suggested casts for them. She was a leading light on the board of the Stage Society. The way her contribution is written about was that she was his wife and typing his manuscripts. According to Oakley, they don't give her any intellectual credit in many of these biographies, when much of his work was actually collaborative with her. The play St Joan, for example, was Charlotte's idea, and it's commonly known that most of the time Charlotte did not take any credit for the help she gave Shaw. As Oakley clearly explains, a lot of the work was teamwork. Charlotte really helped him write a lot of the plays. She suggested amendments and so on. On one wall you'll see a painting of T. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of the Arabia, and they treated Lawrence. He used to turn up uninvited if he wished, and he was just like a son to George Bernard Shaw and Charlotte. Oakley in her book explains that recent research has shown that Charlotte wrote a lot to Lawrence and helped him immensely. She made comments about Lawrence's work, suggested amendments. There is evidence she had a massive impact on Lawrence's writings and was really essential to the success of Lawrence's work. But again, so many people have assumed she played some kind of minor role. So there we are. As Oakley explains in her book, Charlotte had a very, very important role in the work that George Bernard Shaw did, and also in Lawrence of Arabia's work. One of my favourite rooms at Shaw's Corner is the kitchen, and John Lucas, in his marvellous book entitled Hertfordshire Curiosities, talks about how he came to visit George Bernard Shaw on his bicycle. He cycled over in 1945 when John Lucas was aged 17 to have a chat with Shaw and get advice on how to become a journalist and so forth. And he was greeted very nicely by the housekeeper, Mrs. Leyden, who gave him some lovely homemade treacle tart and a cup of tea in the kitchen. And Shaw characteristically sent John Lucas one of his lovely postcards a few days later, giving him lots of helpful advice and the like. One of the most delightful places, of course, at Shaw's Corner is the garden. What strikes you is that it's so quiet and peaceful, and really on a lovely day it's so enjoyable to go and visit. As you walk around, you'll see a wonderful bronze statue of St Joan, and my very favourite item is George Bernard Shaw's writing shed, which was built on a wheel, which means that it could be moved in any direction to get the light in. You see that George Bernard Shaw loved coming to write here, did a lot of his work in this rotating writing hut. It's really funny, but he called it London, and he instructed all the staff that he was in London, so that if anybody should call, they weren't lying when they informed the people that Shaw's not at the house. He's in fact in London. Quite funny, really, that the writing hut was called London. The Daily Telegraph on the 19th of March 1951 reported that the Shaw's Corner opened on the 18th of March 1951, and that nearly 600 visitors went to visit the home of George Bernard Shaw at Ayot St Lawrence, and it was the first day of opening to the public, and that many people came from overseas, including China, India, and many parts of Europe. Dame Edith Evans opened Shaw's Corner, and it was very, very popular. So much so that, according to an article written in The Guardian on the 11th of April 1951, the villagers of Ayot St Lawrence convened a special meeting, which was reported in The Guardian. A Captain Ames got up and said very sternly, "You have utterly and completely destroyed the amenities of this village. Why not sell the place," he urged, "and just put up a plaque saying that George Bernard Shaw had lived here, as it was, to make a peep show out of the village?" And then he triumphantly produced another alternative solution. "Why not sell the house for a packet to the Americans? Let them take it down brick by brick and transport it across the ocean. Then we shall be happy," he said. Oh dear, what a drama. And then a local council official stood up and said that the National Trust had committed an offence by failing to apply for change of use of the house without the permission of the planning authority. Then another person stood up and said that Shaw would be no doubt looking down upon them and having a right laugh, because they could all talk their blinking heads off, said this man. They could talk as much as they like, and that it wouldn't make any difference, and that the public would still be allowed to go and visit. And thank God we have been. It's so nice to go and visit Shaw's Corner, and I really urge you to do so. I really hope you've enjoyed watching this video. Do give me a thumbs up and please do subscribe. All the very best. Bye bye.